You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. All right. I am joined today by Joanna Townsend. She is a licensed psychotherapist based in Bozeman, Montana, and the owner of Root and Rise, a modern and inclusive mental wellness practice for millennials. Joanna brings her true self and inner nerd to the therapy space. She specializes in the areas of anxiety, perfectionism, self-worth, life transitions, burnout, eating disorder recovery, and is a big advocate of feeling all the feels: authenticity, self-compassion, and letting go of shame. When she's not with clients, she's either hiking, camping, skiing, climbing, making a mess in the kitchen, talking to her plants, or getting lost in fiction novels. Yeah, you've got a nice visual going, and let me tell you, Joanna is a whole vibe that you just kind of want to attach yourself to and not leave. Anyway, today we talk about self-compassion and self-acceptance. We really get into what those two phrases actually mean and what they don't mean. We also get into how to start and elevate our self-compassion practices. We talk about perfectionism and people-pleasing and how both can relate to a lack of self-acceptance and validation. Joanna talks about enoughness for women, for millennials, for content creators, and so much more. Here she is. I'll see you on the other side. Hey, Joanna. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me today.
You too, Christy. I'm excited.
Well, why don't we just start with why you're here, why you're a therapist, why you got into this work?
It is such a loaded question and one that I find I can't sum up in a sentence or two, but I will try my best. So just realizing that a lot of the work I do is informed by A, my own experiences, B, what I witness and observe in others, and C, just kind of this desire to change the way that we talk about mental health. So whether that means my own journey and how I'm supporting others while also having maybe done the work on a specific area, that doesn't mean I have, I can relate to everything that someone may be going through, but I just feel super, called to be in the emotional wellness space and practice as a therapist and just really transform the way we think about mental health and work on ourselves and talk about the hard stuff that for generations we didn't.
And I know you shared with me prior to the interview, just in my questions that I ask everybody, that you have dealt with anxiety, depression, disordered eating, things like this. Was there a point where you, for lack of a better way to ask it, just woke up and was like, hey, I'm going to start working on myself and heal? Or how did that process go? Was this something, were these things that you've been dealing with your whole life? Or was there a turning point, I guess? Because I feel like for me, there was a very clear turning point of motherhood as being sort of this catalyst for, whoa, I'm not okay. And feeling like some of these feelings, anxiety, depression, may have been bubbling for a little bit of my young adult into adult life, but not really realizing it until I was forced to in motherhood. So I'm always curious if there was a catalyst to sort of your self-development journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, I talk with a lot of students and a lot of um yeah, folks that are studying psychology or social work and wanting to go into therapy. And we often all relate to this idea of whether it was in high school or in college, taking a psychology class
Mm,
or abnormal psychology, which is sort of a standard 101, and realizing, like, oh, that sounds like me, or that sounds like my
mm,
uncle or my cousin. But because our own defenses are often pretty high, right? I don't think I was ready or willing to look at myself probably until grad school.
mm,
And I think the catalyst was really facing a lot of the disordered eating or eating responses that I was engaging in, and wanting to show up for clients that are struggling with that, and not being, I don't know how to say this. I don't mean like an imposter or fake about it, but I wanted to be true to like what I believed in. And that
mm.
meant facing my own stuff as well.
Yeah, almost like practicing what you preach, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You and I mentioned this to you earlier, but you have a phrase on your website about having a previously uber funky relationship with food and exercise. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about what that looked like before and how you work through that, because this is a hot topic on my show and just personally in my own life right now.
It is steaming hot just in, yeah, culture and so many people that struggle with it. I use the word or the phrase uber funky just because I try not to pathologize things that are normal, common experiences. So
Mm,
I'm definitely a therapist that doesn't love the medical model that we tend to have around like calling things disorders and all of that.
okay.
So just kind of generalizing it to, I still use those terms, but generalizing it to how can I relate what I love working on with folks to kind of normalizing a little bit more, because there's so much shame, especially when it comes to food and body stuff. So, man, where do I start? I mean, I would say in hindsight, I was definitely struggling with a lot of what is considered orthorexia
Mm,
and sort of the socially sanctioned obsession with healthy eating and fitness and kind of like moral based eating.
mm,
Um, and because that way of eating is very praised and applauded, and we know obviously has, intersections with privilege and body size and things like that, I didn't see it as an issue. I mean, deep down, it wasn't the greatest period of my life when I was going through all of that, but it felt like that was, yeah, what people wanted to see or what doctors were praising me on,
mhm,
or people were saying, I was so healthy or disciplined or things like that. But,
mhm,
if I look back on that chapter of my life, it was very lonely and very dark and very shameful, because there was also a lot of orthorexia, but also like binge eating because I was restricting a lot.
mm, mhm, mhm. And what was the healing process like for you? Like how did you get to where you're sitting now?
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, so much compassion, which is why I really align with using compassion based approaches for any healing that we do. And really confronting what I was going through, not from this is bad, why are you doing this, but what may be going on or what may be contributing to what food and body stuff is feeling and looking like for you.
Mhm,
And so doing a lot of work on and being exposed to a lot of the changes that we were seeing in the eating disorder field, right? It
okay.
used to be very black and white, I would say. And I mean, orthorexia is still not considered a eating response in the diagnostic statistical
Mm,
manual of, yeah, like disorders and mental illness. It's not. So it's 2022 and there are so many people struggling with that, but they're not able to get the help because I think a lot of providers and practitioners don't see the issues with that or don't like look deeper. But yeah, really confronting like weight stigmas that I was internalizing and my relationship with food that was not healthy, and doing a lot of inner work on the messaging and culture and being critical of the systems in place, and even like science sometimes that is biased. especially around topics like fatness or obesity. So, I mean, that was one part of it, like really criticizing diet and wellness culture, but also looking at what was I coping with
Mm.
and coping from, right? And it was a lot of anxiety and perfectionism and fears of like not doing or being enough. And so, the way that I learned how to cope was through finding small ways to, yeah, control my body or what I was eating.
Mm-hmm. Can you recall a you know, well, it's going to sound as like a silly question, but I'll explain it afterwards if it sounds truly silly. But do you recall like a timeline, like how long this healing process took? And I'm sure even now, and you can tell me, like I don't know that it's ever something that's like fully like goes away, and maybe for you it has. I don't know, but did it take a long time? I'm asking because I want to know.
The short answer is yes.
Yeah.
The long answer is I think it's ever evolving.
Mm,
I don't think that I would probably say the decade where I struggled with a lot of that most, I wouldn't say I'm still really working through the hard parts of that. I think it can show up like anything, but it's not like a big cloud in my brain, or it
mhm,
doesn't cause as much stress. I can notice if there's, a response that I'm having to something and be like, huh, interesting. Okay. But not feel attached to a thought or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, back to my short answer, I would say I think this number is no longer accurate, but at one point, the research on eating disorders and disordered eating showed that it took someone around 7 years to addressing what may be going on until like healing and recovery. And there's a lot of, I guess, like challenges to the term like recovered or recovery. Like sometimes what does that mean for someone? But I think it's really personal and unique. So yeah, I think it takes time like anything, because to some degree, the behaviors or things that we're engaging in that don't feel well are like serving a purpose until they're no longer. And so, that may have also been serving me even while I was still trying to like work through it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I find that I feel like I make progress, and I know I have. I shouldn't say I feel like I know I've made a lot of progress, but what tends to happen is I'll have an experience, an interaction, or something where, you know, there's progress happening in my little bubble here, in my home, in my head, in my journal, in my therapy sessions. And then I go out into the world and I have an experience, or like I said, I have an interaction. And, I've been doing and feeling like a lot better with my stuff. And just for clarity for you, I'm not dealing with an eating disorder. I'm just dealing with living in a much larger and different body than I ever have in 33 years on the planet, and just sort of like really, really confronting my beliefs on food and diet and culture and exercise and everything, and having to completely rewire my brain on all of this. And, I feel I know where I am from where I was a year ago, right? But as recently as yesterday, I'm at a black tie event, and it's like, oh, this is a new experience in this headset that I'm in. Like, it's one thing now that I'm learned how to like dress differently and buy different sizes and things and that. But it was, I don't know, it just was like a place and an experience in a way that I needed to be dressed and out that I hadn't had since sort of going through this. And it was like, it hit me like a Mack truck. And it's like, God, can we just get over a hump here? Like it's just like, and my whole point is to say, I find that the struggle for me always comes up with, you know, which is inevitable, going out into the world where diet culture and thinness and all the things that you mentioned are still the things that are in your face and praised and complimented and everything. And it's you can hear I'm frustrated. I don't even have a
Yeah.
question. I'm like, just let me vent to you, Joanna.
100% away. I mean, truly, it's kind of like being, yeah, socialized or growing up and thinking the color red is red, and that's what you see. And then 33 years later, you're realizing that that's not red at all and that it's yellow or something,
Yeah.
right? So realizing that the whole all the ideas that you hold and all of the thoughts or beliefs are wrong or
Yeah.
biased or not actually the full picture. Like it's really, I don't know the word to describe it, but I'm sure you can relate. Like
It's
it's really,
jarring. It's
yes.
it's jarring, it's
Mm-hmm.
shocking. It's like, what? Like, I feel like I've
Mm-hmm.
been duped, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I bought a ticket to the wrong ride. I just was like, whoa. And I've been going round and
Mm-hmm.
round on that ride for decades. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's reminding me, that where I'm at too is where my block is right now is the acceptance piece, and it's so tied to compassion, right? Like, here I am at this event, really trying to hold space for myself and show myself compassion. How, like, help me with that. How do we start to show compassion to ourselves? Like, if you're going to work with a client, like, what are some ways it could look like to be like, hey, let's practice showing ourselves some compassion?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I'll start with giving us an example that is unrelated to body and food stuff.
That's totally fine, because I could do tangents on that all day, and sometimes it's nice not to.
Right. Yeah. And then we can loop it back. But I think taking away can help,
Okay.
like stepping away from it can help us look at, okay, how can that look then when we apply it to something more like personal in a way,
Hmm.
like our bodies or, how we take up space. So if we think about a, I don't know, thunderstorm or something, right? We can accept that we don't want that to be what's happening because we had plans and we wanted to enjoy a beautiful day and a sunny walk and be outside. That doesn't mean we like what's going on. It just means we're accepting that that's where it's at. That is the weather today. And so being compassionate to what we may be feeling about that experience,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm disappointed. Oh, I'm feeling a little grief because I had all these plans and now it feels like a loss or a waste. And so compassion means seeing the feelings that we might be having and being gentle with them, right? And validating them. I think compassion and validation like go hand in hand because we have to see our experiences and allow for them. And then acceptance means like, this is where we're at. It doesn't mean resignation.
Mm-hmm.
It just means this is where we're at. So let's say we're feeling, yeah, a lot of anxiety, and we can have compassion for, yeah, it makes sense that you're feeling this way. There's just a lot going on and your body's a little activated. Acceptance would mean accepting that that's where our body's at. We're having a lot of sensations that are uncomfortable and distressing. We don't like it. We're not approving of it. It doesn't mean acceptance is saying like, this is great. It just
Mm-hmm.
means like, oof, this is where we're at. And how can we be gentle and kind around this experience?
Mm-hmm.
Because the opposite would be being harsh, and that only exacerbates what we may be feeling, right? Like literally in our brain,
Mm-hmm.
self-criticism will stimulate more stress hormones and
Mm-hmm.
will activate, a stronger fear response in our amygdala. So neuroscience backed up that like compassion literally does help us regulate a little bit more. So it's kind of just seeing what we're experiencing as like normal, natural, allowing for it to happen, and then accepting that that's where we may be at. So we can kind of play around with what does that look like with body stuff. But I wanted to give you those two examples because
Mm-hmm.
that can just be helpful, like take away, or to have another, yeah, like a different lens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, two questions for you following that. Um, I really appreciate the when you said that, the validation and the acceptance is not resignation, because that's how I typically feel about it. Um, is there ever a time where I think for me, I struggle with acceptance, the word itself. Like, is there another word that you use or that I might be able to use? Because acceptance to me just really feels like resignation. And it's hard for me to talk myself out of that. I don't know if I just need more time with it, but I don't know. I struggle with that word. Like it doesn't resonate with me in the way that I want
Hmm.
it to.
Sure. I would say respect,
Huh.
especially around body stuff. And I'm saying this from the perspective of being someone who has a lot of thin privilege. And so I don't know what it's like to have my body discriminated against or stigmatized. And I just wanted to add that because I think that's an important piece of this. But respect and being able to like respect what we may be feeling. And if respect means, yeah, being kind and caring and loving and gentle, um, if that feels like it's more like touching
Mhm.
as opposed to accept, which I know a lot of folks can feel like that just means I'm not caring or giving up
Right.
or resigning. But yeah, ultimately, when it does come to self-worth, accepting like who we are is sort of part of it. So whatever synonym works,
Mhm.
but the messaging is around like how do we still care and be respectful to like who we are and whatever size or shape we may be in and whether that changes or not because bodies change all the time.
Yeah. And I do appreciate you saying that, you know, speaking from a place of privilege and having thin privilege, and I appreciate it mostly because I don't think my body's ever been criticized or stigmatized or anything by anyone other than myself. So it's like it's kind of a weird thing. I recognize that it's so personal. Like it's so in me. Like no one is looking at me and doing what I know has been done to so many, particularly women in larger bodies that I've talked to on the show, that I've talked to, in my community and things like that. And that, to my knowledge, that's not happening to me unless it's happening behind my back, which we never know. But my point is like all of the harshness and all of the criticism comes from me. And so going back, what I said, I had two questions. My second was in giving myself and giving ourselves that respect, or for someone listening, if acceptance feels really good to them, I sometimes do feel like I'm trying to convince myself rather than truly feel it. So, are there, because when I think of showing myself compassion, offering myself respect and love, it often comes in the form of, talking to myself and catching the negative thoughts. Like, are there other ways to do that? Because sometimes, like I said, I find that when I'm talking to myself, it just sounds like, "Oh, please, please believe that you love yourself." You know what I mean? Like, and so I'm wondering if there's other avenues, other outlets that I could try to like come at it from, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. No, it's a good point. And just along the idea of, yeah, like harshness that we may receive, right? We know that body image is mental.
Mhm,
And so, yes, there are, of course, certain bodies and sizes that are, there's more oppression towards
mhm.
and a lot more like outward discrimination. And that doesn't mean someone that is in a socially acceptable body size can't also experience the same internal struggle,
Right.
right? But it's just kind of compounded. So, yeah, I would say thoughts are one part of it. And I always say this that we don't have to believe something entirely to practice it.
Okay.
So I do think there's value in still practicing it because, of course, if you're used to being more critical or more harsh, being more gentle is going to feel inauthentic at first. And I think that would make sense because it just doesn't feel
Yeah,
familiar.
it feels
It's not
phony.
what you're used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm like, "Who
And
is this
so
talking to me? I don't know this person." Yeah.
so I think we can still practice something before it's really setting in. The other piece, though, I would say, if that feels and when that feels phony, we also have to remember that our bodies like physiologically respond to the way we talk to them, right? So when we are able to slow down or just kind of treat our bodies also with the same kindness and love, not just that we're saying like being kind in our thoughts, but being kind in how we're showing up, whether it's slowing down or opting for, I don't know, something more gentle in terms of movement, like some stretching or walking, or the way we're like eating, or just generally how we're like holding ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that can also help us with connecting that, like how do we show respect also in how we're treating our bodies and taking care of them, especially when it comes to like respect. So yeah, I don't know if that offers like another tool when it feels phony,
Yeah.
because we also have to remember that like our bodies are kind of listening to what we're saying, and that manifests physiologically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether we're feeling like we're just walking through this world really fast, or body checking, or like forcing ourselves to do all this exercise, like that's also yeah, gonna have like more harshness with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you working primarily with women?
Yes.
Okay. So, because I feel like everything we've been talking about, and we certainly don't need to like stick to body. It's just something that is so present for me. So feel free to add any other sort of examples that are relevant to you or your work, but it does feel like this is a common one to women. Are there other areas, other grievances, other challenges that you're hearing and seeing regularly from your women client base?
I would say that is such a common one, that it's one that I see like more than anything else,
Mm, okay.
because it's so tied to, I'm just gonna go and say this, it's just tied to like the existence of being someone that identifies as a woman, right? So
Yeah.
it's so like deeply entrenched in feminist psychology and the psychology of women, so that I would say is pretty high on what I see and what I help people with, even if it's not actually what someone is coming in for,
Mhm.
right? Like someone may be wanting to work on perfectionism or anxiety or people pleasing, or yeah, self-worth. And then when we ask more questions, there often is something else going on with food and body. Not always. I think it's possible for those to be experiences that someone has a balanced or healthy relationship to food and body. That does exist for women.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would say there's so many like interconnections with things like anxiety, because eating disorders or disordered eating or eating responses, whatever we want to call them, are coping. Like it's a way we're trying to do something. So it's behavioral. And so if we're experiencing anxiety or a lot of fears or a lot of like self-worth or a lot of um,
Mhm.
perfectionism and people pleasing, how are we coping with that?
Mhm.
And behaviorally, food stuff and body stuff comes up.
Mhm. Um, perfectionism is not something kind of on its own that I've really talked about yet on the show. Will you, what is your working definition of perfectionism before I ask you something else about it, but just so we have a frame of reference for what we're talking about. Um, because it can be much deeper, I think, than when someone's just like, I don't know. I feel like these terms now, like on one hand, it's so great that they're all of these like self-development and therapy like terminology is on social media and in the media and all these things, but they also get thrown around a lot. And so could you share what your definition of perfectionism is?
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't agree more with
Yeah.
what you just said about terms and things. So the way I see it, and the way a lot of those in the therapy and mental health community see it is a behavior or a way to cope or seek safety or approval through, overworking, or never feeling enough, or never trying something that you may not be good at, or the fear of making mistakes, or needing to constantly excel and strive for more. And when we uncloak, the mask of perfectionism, there is always fear and not actually feeling like it's ever enough. So the difference with someone that may, yeah, like work on things or have goals and maybe present as being a high achiever. It doesn't mean there's perfectionism, because self-worth has to be a little more integrated. And so the result may look the same, right? There may be certain outward, I don't know, parts of someone's life, but perfectionism is sort of the in between, right? Like, what is getting someone there? Is it like very fear fueled, or is it more like wanting to stretch what's possible, and failures don't define us and don't cripple us? So yeah, it's very, very like messy and nuanced and complicated.
Are there like where how so do you think that is perfectionism something that would show up early in someone's life? Could it become an issue at any point? Like what is the root of perfectionism? What are some options? As I'm sure it's different for everyone, but what are some potential roots of this sort of behavior?
Yeah, I would say probably the most common ones are feeling like your worth is defined by what you do or how objectively successful you are. And so I think it can show up at different stages. It often does have childhood roots. And like we know, a lot of origins of some of our behaviors do come from childhood, and perfectionism sometimes is a trauma response or stress response. Um, and it can sometimes come from the parenting we received, whether it was very strict or we felt we only received love if we got that A or scored that goal or gone to a certain college or had a certain income or whatever. So it can definitely, I think, come up at different parts of our life, but often is either reinforced by the messaging we're getting from people around us, but it can also be kind of the beliefs we hold. We can have parenting that didn't have that, and perfectionism can still pop up because we may feel that it's never enough, or we compare a lot, or just get messages from society that kind of do reinforce and model perfectionism.
Yeah. I, you know, I've opened up a conversation on my platforms about mental health for content creators, and I I feel like this is a big part of that. And when I have these conversations, because there is this feeling like in order to be, relevant on platforms, you have to do it perfectly. You have to nail the algorithm. You have to do all of the changing trends and everything involved, and you got to post every day. And then there's also the side of it that when you're building, a brand on a social media, that you're sort of like perfecting this persona rather than, I don't know what you're on social media. How is it for you showing up on social media as far as it goes with perfectionism, but also just being a therapist and being out there with it?
Mm-hmm. I think about this all the time. First, because I see it's such a big part of our life, right? And business and brand stuff. And as a therapist, I do see just the way someone may hold presence. And it's exhausting
Yeah.
to be constantly maintaining, someone's presence or be producing content. And I know obviously, there's different levels of where someone might be at with like having help or, a team that's helping them with that. But I just have a complicated relationship to, my social presence and platforms and social media because I love it, but there is a lot of pressure. And so I really try to check myself. And I am a huge believer in just showing up imperfectly. I've like looked back on newsletters and been like, oh, wow, that was a run-on sentence for a paragraph or misspelling things or little reels that I don't know, the captions don't work, and I just keep them because I want to also embody that. So I think because I'm also passionate about my own care and wellness and my relationships, pretty much everything I hold in life, I try to just check myself more, with like if something is causing me stress or I'm like feeling pressure, I will pause, and maybe not always perfectly, but I will take time off and really honor what I need. So I think my relationship to it is kind of skewed by being someone who doesn't want to put that same pressure on myself that I'm trying to help others with. So it's not always perfect, and I can definitely still struggle with it, but yeah, it's draining.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think yeah, it's such a double-edged sword, right? Because, on one hand, most of the people that I meet for this show, yourself included, I wouldn't know of you potentially without social media, right? And I wouldn't make connections and learn who's listening to the show and resonating with something. On the other hand, I think it is such a big factor to, like you said, the pressure we put on ourselves to be perfect. And I think it ripple effects into everything because I can see someone's social media account that's another podcaster, for example, and go, oh, like X person is doing XYZ. Like, oh, maybe I should be doing that. Da, 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 da. But then it's also scrolling and you're seeing someone's house that they're redecorating or their beautifully plated food that they put together for their 2-year-old. And, then you have the craft accounts and like all these different things that can hit you boom, 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 and literally can trigger any aspect of your life within a second at your fingertips. Like it's just wild. Like when you say you check yourself, what does that mean and how do you do it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I did this yesterday. I was looking at someone that kind of works in mental wellness, and I noticed so much comparison happening, and then noticing what I was putting on my own to-do list,
Mm,
right? So checking myself really means like when I'm noticing myself going kind of deep in whether it's looking at someone's platform, am I being curious? Am I feeling inspired? Am I wanting to connect? Or am I feeling, or is it making me not feel like enough? Or is it putting pressure on me?
mm,
So really like honing in on, and I think that's when doing work on connecting to our bodies and recognize like what our bodies and our emotions may be trying to communicate with us, helping us see like what's going on here, and checking in with the thoughts that I'm having, the comparison, the beliefs that are getting triggered. And it may not actually be anything about this person,
right.
right? They just exist and are showing, a very small part of their life, or
Hmm.
maybe a bigger part of their life. But knowing, if I hold up a mirror, what is this saying about how I may be feeling about my own self? And how can I like disconnect for a sec and be like, wait, hang on.
Hmm.
Like you're fine. It's enough. So it is, I think, a constant practice, especially with whether it's home stuff or someone's job or business. I mean, there's so many ways this comes up. And I do think to some degree, and I do talk about this, that comparison is pretty natural
Mm,
and normal. It's part of like human evolution, right? We want to like gauge where we are and see, are we going to be safe and have shelter and community? So it's kind of in our wiring, but our relationship to it can either be creating wounds to our self-worth or being a source of inspiration
mhm.
and I don't know, connection. So it really depends on how it makes us feel.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that came to mind for me as you were talking is I can see that, like being wired to, kind of be taking note. Okay, where do I land? Like things like that. And but I think wherever that wiring came from, whenever it was created, right? Like I'm speaking like ridiculously like out there right now, but there wasn't a device in our hand that made it possible to compare all day long, right? Like I'm home alone most of the time unless I'm with my toddlers. And so really home should be a place where there's not even opportunity for that type of feeling to arise, but because I have this device in my hand, it's possible. When you For you, do you physically feel it or is it just thoughts?
I would say there's like physiological responses
What
for
does it
sure.
feel like? Like where does it show up for you in your body?
Hmm. Being kind of glued and
Mm,
not being aware of what's going on,
yeah.
or like what time is it, or what did I want to be doing right now? Because it's so easy to click on a new tab or, just pick up your phone when you're idle. So just noticing that I'm like not present.
Hmm.
And then my breathing is definitely going to be like more shallow,
Okay.
and I'm going to be a little more tense than I may have been
Hmm.
10 minutes ago or before I went into this
Mhm.
little fixation mode. So noticing like, yeah, what is going on for me? And then the thoughts that are coming up, right? Like, wow, look at what they're doing. Should I do this? So just knowing, what's going on mentally and physiologically for me. But you're right. I mean, I think social media is complicated because I love the community and connection aspect, but there's of course undoubtedly negative consequences for all of us. So I think it really means like cultivating a healthy relationship to it. And I do think it's possible. Again, it's going to be imperfect, but I think it's possible to realize that, yeah, everyone's not showing every part of their life.
Right.
And we know that. And I know that's changing and people
Mhm.
are more open to, sharing like the non-aesthetic parts of our life. But that's something that is also helpful to just like take a step back and be like, I don't know the whole story of
Mhm.
this person that I'm creating a whole narrative about and then comparing myself to. Like, let me come back to like what is feeling good to me or possible for me or what life, feels like for me. But
Mhm.
it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's hard. I don't it seems like it shouldn't be that hard, but it is. Um well,
I
and
know.
the other thing I was thinking as you're talking is like that is something that someone could seek out professional help for, right? Like if you're finding that you're constantly on social media or at your office or just online somewhere in life out in the world, really struggling with comparison and perfectionism, like these are things that you can seek professional help for. And I think that that's not always understood. What do you see as some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings about therapy, who it's for, what it's about, what someone can get out of it? Because I don't know that everybody knows what you can go what you can go get therapy for, you can get out for.
Hmm. Right. And it's of course evolving, right? And like you mentioned earlier, we are getting more comfortable acknowledging it and normalizing it and it being something that we just do like any other way we take care of our wellness. But I do think there's totally still this idea that it means something is wrong or that you can't figure out your stuff on your own
Mhm.
or that it means there must be, I don't know, like a really significant crisis going on or a mental disorder or yeah, all these really like shamey, blamey, individualistic ways of looking at health.
Shamey, blamey.
And I
That's
think
good.
it's still shamey, blamey.
Shamey, blamey. I like that.
So I think it's still there. But I did recently, I think in the last few years in my like new client forums, asked about tell me about your relationship to social media. Because
Mm.
I think that can inform, what does life look like in idle times or
Mhm.
what's
Mhm.
our routines? And, I think having having just like insight and being honest with ourselves. Like I think it's really hard to live in this life with the platforms and um, social media presence. So
Mhm.
you're right. It is something that we can work on because it probably relates to other things too.
Yeah. Do you think that therapy is for everyone?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I want to say yes because I do believe that everyone can get something out of it.
Mhm.
And if all of us had access and the ability and the cultural and systemic and familial support to have gotten therapy or worked on what we can work on in therapy, yeah, we would probably have a whole different relationship to emotions in our culture. We would be more empathetic. There would be, just less rigidity and harshness. But I also don't think it's for everyone because I don't think everyone is willing or is able to let go of like defenses or not wanting to look at themselves. So while I think therapy can help us with that, I think if we are coming into therapy and not wanting to kind of look at how we're also contributing to things going on in our life or challenges or be open to saying, oh yeah, that is something I'm struggling with, or yeah, I do that, or oof, that is impacting my relationships, then we're not going to get much from it if we're not open.
Mhm. Mhm. I was listening to a podcast, and this is not the first time I've brought this up on the show, and I keep not remembering to look up who said it. but, and I can't remember what the podcast it was on, but it sticks with me. She's a psychologist or something, and she's giving an interview where she's like, "I'm so glad that there is this, mental health movement right now, and and encouraging people to go to therapy and seek out counseling and help." She's like, "But if we truly look at the system that we have, particularly in the US, everyone that we're encouraging to go have therapy, if they actually did it, the whole system would fall. Like, we're not prepared. There's not enough therapists. There's not enough access and resources. Like, I don't know. It just was such a like hit you between the eyes statement, like here, someone like me, I interview therapists like you and just women who have benefited from therapy. And we're all like, yeah, yeah, go, go, go. And this woman was just like, yeah, that's great. And don't stop. She's like, but if literally everyone took you up on that suggestion, I don't know that our system could support everyone who then would trying to be benefiting from it. I don't know. It was just one of those like, huh, we have a lot of work to
Mhm.
do feeling.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, to some degree, we aren't equipped.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're under resourced from the community level, and a lot of times we're getting therapy not in a preventive way, right? Like
Yes,
the
true.
ideal would be to
Mhm.
have a lot of preventative mental health support and access and education, but we don't have that. And so it is an individual journey. I mean, of course, we can have therapy in relationships or couples work or family work or whatnot. But it is kind of like something that often happens, I think, like way down the line.
Mhm.
So it's a tough topic, and I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's a good point
Yeah.
because yeah, there's definitely not enough, and our system is, I don't even know if it's broken because it did it ever work? I don't think so. I
Yeah.
don't think healthcare in this country has ever worked in a health caring way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think, just without opening that whole can of worms, I'll just crack it and just say like for mental health, for behavioral health and mental health, it it's still like it's still like the ugly stepsister, like whatever that means. Like it's not to me, it just doesn't seem like it's taken as seriously still, that the coverages what they could be in comparison to, you know, physical health and all the things. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, all right, that's a rabbit hole. So anyway, and Joanna, another topic I talk a lot about on the show is self-care and taking care of ourselves and actually how we make it happen. So what do you do to take care of yourself, and how do you make sure you make the time for it?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Self-care to me is not just the feel good things,
Mm,
right? Like it's such a topic that we're
mhm.
like, take care of ourselves and self-care, and I don't know, take a day off work, and take a bath or whatever. And that is self-care, of course. It depends. And I think it's a personal, unique, individualized process to decide like what works for me. For me, it is, yeah, not always the things that I want to do. Um, Maybe it means like having a hard conversation with a friend, or yeah, confronting mistakes or something that I want to work on in my own therapy, or like not procrastinating on, I don't know, like paying a bill or opening the mail. Like those are also self-caring because
Yeah.
I think they're like, how are we caring for ourselves to
Yeah.
be in like sustainable ways
Mhm,
towards who I want to be,
mhm.
So yeah, but of course I would say, I mean, the typical answer for me would be I absolutely love hiking and climbing. I live in Bozeman, Montana, so very like outdoor centric community. And so being outside is my self-care, but there's lots of ways I also engage in self-care that aren't always the like pleasing,
Yeah.
yummy ways.
Yeah. The procrastination one hits home because usually when I finally decide to do the thing, it takes 2.5 minutes. I'm like, wow, I've agonized over this for 2 weeks. And in these 2 minutes, it's done. Like, that's fun. And just out of curiosity, I know you've lived in quite a few places. Is there a favorite? of where you've lived or a place you would go back to? Or I don't know. You have a very interesting. I saw you lived everywhere from Mexico City, where you were born, to India, DC, North Carolina, New York City, and now, like you said, you're in Montana. So I don't know. Any place stick out as like, whoa, I really loved it there.
Yeah, it's so I moved to the US when I was 8, and so my like early
Oh
experiences were
wow.
in Mexico
Yeah.
City and New Delhi, and I was a child, and I think there was such a formative part of living in, yeah, big cities than abroad and things like that. I would love to. I have gone back to both Mexico City and New Delhi, and just for like tourism and visiting and things like that. But I'd have to say, like, right now, I think is what feels most me right now
Hmm.
because of, yeah, just who I am. I'm a different person than I was, 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So I think my personality and what brings me joy, and I'm more like slower than I used to be.
Hmm.
And I think the mountains just offer me, exactly the opportunity to, yeah, like live a slower, more, I don't know, peaceful
You're feeling
life.
aligned. You're feeling in flow.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice.
Exactly.
Okay.
The too long didn't read, feeling and
Yeah.
flow.
All right. Well, Joanna, is there anything related to this conversation that, is sitting with you still that you want to make sure to share, or something I didn't think to ask you in relation to anything we've talked about today?
I would say, for anyone listening that resonates with whether it's compassion or self-worth or the relationship to food and body, it's never, a wrong time to get some support. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be at a certain degree of severity or,
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is bad enough. It can just be you're wanting just like an outlet to prevent something or just to check in. So there's never like a wrong time to seek out support. Um, that would be my, yeah, closing
Yeah.
encouraging statement.
Well, and you have other, there's ways of working with you outside of, you know, straight up therapy, right? Like you have workshops and courses you want to tell us a little bit about. You have a feeling feelings course coming up soon. What's that about?
Yep. Yeah. So my one-on work is limited to clients in Montana, and then I also maintain licensees in DC and Maryland. But yeah, outside of one-on-one work, I have a course coming up, which I'm so excited about, on feeling feelings. So a lot of times the education that we get on mental health is just not there, and we do a lot of that work in therapy. But yeah, my hopes in creating this course, it's like almost done, is to offer a 101 on, okay, how do we like recognize our emotions? Like, what are they?
Mm.
What's the neuroscience perspective on what they are? How can we listen to them a little more? So it's a mix of like a self-paced course with audio for me, where I'm kind of walking us through, and has a big chunky workbook to come with it. So yeah, it's just like learning how to feel feelings. A little more, because there aren't enough resources on that. So my hope is to bridge the gap with this course coming up.
Cool. And do you have a launch date for it?
It was a few days ago,
Oh,
but that didn't happen. No, it
oh,
didn't
okay. I was
happen.
like, wow, I missed it.
So I'm hoping, yeah, by like November 1st.
Okay.
So
Okay.
TBD.
Once it goes live, is it something that will be live sort of for an indefinite period of time, or is there a window that someone should look out for to sign up?
No window. It would be indefinite,
Okay.
live, available on my website,
Okay.
joannatownsend.com. There may be price differences that pop up with earlier registrants,
Right.
but
Okay.
yeah, coming out soon.
Cool. And are any of your workshops currently available right now?
There aren't any that I'm, yeah, actively like offering right now.
Okay.
There's the Breaking Up with Perfectionism one that I have coming up. So once this course rolls out, it'll be shortly after that. So
Okay.
sometime later this fall.
Very cool. Okay. All right. Well, Joanna, thank you so much for your time. This was Excellent. And I will link, of course, your website where anyone listening can find out more about the courses and what you do. So thank you again for your time.
You're welcome. It was so great to chat, Christy. I'm so glad, to have this conversation and talk about things that we all struggle with.
Okay, so you know what I'm going to say, right? If you've been listening to this show with any sort of consistency, you know the big takeaway for me. It's all about that acceptance is not resignation. I'm hearing this now over and over and over again, and I want it to click so badly, but it's still so hard. It's making me a little nutty. I do like the suggestion that Joanna gave of perhaps thinking of self-acceptance as self-respect. I can get down with that. I'm pushing it around my brain. It's not totally, feeling 100, but we're getting there. And as I write and record this, I'm just having that overwhelming feeling of why is it so hard to love ourselves? And I know I'm speaking from such a place of privilege. First of all, yes, I'm a white woman. I have parents who love me. I'm educated. I have a partner, a marriage, a kids. I'm all the things that regularly get praised, pushed on us, and loved. And it's still hard for me. This is when I have to remind myself that my experience still matters, and so does yours. I just want to acknowledge that I have the self-awareness to know that I'm not sitting here like, woe is me, playing victim, or believing that I have it worse than someone else. I'm merely wanting to make the point that my life is generally pretty great, and I still struggle with showing myself compassion, love, and acceptance. We're working on it. Anyway, a couple of points and phrases that I jotted down as Joanna spoke that I want to reiterate with little to no explanation other than to ask you to think about them before we go. The first one is, we don't have to believe something entirely in order to practice it. The second is, our bodies are listening and respond to our thoughts. And the third is, when we uncloak the perfectionism, is there fear behind it? What is driving perfectionism? And last but certainly not least, and kind of just because I like it, shamey blamey. All right. Anyway, thank you, Joanna. Thank you for listening. I am out. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.